You've done everything for me. You've done everything for me. You've done everything for me. You've done everything. Oh, you've done everything for me. You've done everything. You've done everything for me. And then we're gonna say, you supply every need. You're so faithful to me. You've done everything for me. What have you not done for me? You've done so much for me. I give you all. You've done so much for me. Come on and put your hands together if you know what is done. Oh, here we go. Say you've done everything. You've done everything. Done everything for me. You've done everything for me. You've done everything. Everything for me. You've done everything for me. You've done everything for me. And He supplied every one of my needs. Supplied every need. You're so faithful to me. You've done everything for me. What have you not done for me? For me. We give you glory. 'Cause you've done so much for me. Come on and put your hands together. Oh, God, we thank you. God, we glorify you. You've done you. First Kings chapter 17, verse 2 through verse 9, you'll find these words recorded. God then told Elijah, get out of here and fast. Head east and hide out at the Kerith ravine on the other side of the Jordan River. You can drink fresh water from the brook. I've ordered the ravens to feed you. Elijah obeyed God's orders. He went and camped in the Kerith Canyon on the other side of the Jordan. And sure enough, ravens brought him his meals, both breakfast and supper, and he drank from the brook. Eventually, the brook dried up because of the drought. Then God spoke to him, "Get up and go to Zarephath in Sidon and live there. I've instructed a woman who lives there, a widow, to feed you." I want you to turn to your neighbor and shout to them, "Hang in there." All right, I'm going to give you one more shout. Shout to your neighbor, "Hang in there." Help is on the way. You may be seated in the Lord's presence. That's what I want to talk about this morning. Hang in there. Help is on the way. One of the greatest chapters in all of the Bible on the subject of what it means to trust in God is 1 Kings chapter 17. And what I want to do with these 15 Baptist moments that I have this morning, because a Baptist moment is different from any other kind of moment. Some of us have been around church long enough to know that I'm closing doesn't necessarily mean I'm closing. That might mean there's another 30 minutes going on in the process. But in these 15 Baptist minutes that I have, I want to take 1 Kings chapter 17 and try and break it into some manageable pieces. It again proves to us what it really means to trust in God. The first piece is actually found in verse 1 down through verse 6, and it is this: the Lord moves in mysterious ways. So, Ronisha, I have lived just long enough to finally understand that I don't understand as much about God as I thought I did. I've been a Bible student. I've been a Bible teacher. I've been a Bible communicator. But passages like 1 Kings chapter 17 teach me that I don't know as much about God as I thought I did. Verse 1 through verse 6 proves that the Lord moves in mysterious ways. By the time you get to verse 1 of 1 Kings chapter 17, God's people, the nation of Israel, is under judgment and condemnation because of their sin. The primary sin that they suffered from or were plagued by was the sin of idolatry. Idolatry is when God does something for you and you give something or someone else credit. An idol becomes an idol the moment you place more attention on it than you place on God. And the reason many of them were following idols is because idols did not come with responsibility or accountability. Some of us, not any of you in this room, but some of your cousins, if you could choose your own God, you would. And if we could choose a God, we would choose a God who didn't have any problems with the way that we are living. If we could choose our own Bible, we would take out all of the verses that we didn't agree with. It was much like that lady who was in church, and everything that her pastor said, she shouted behind him, "Preach, brother pastor, tell them they need to get it right." He'd talk about running around on your spouse, and she'd shout, "Preach, brother pastor, tell them they need to get it right." He'd talk about drinking alcohol and smoking, and she'd shout, "Preach, brother pastor, tell them they need to get it right." But one Sunday morning, he got up and talked about dipping snuff. And she said, "Hold on, brother pastor, you done gone to meddling now." Most of us, if we could choose our own God or choose our own Bible, we would choose a God or a Bible that condoned our behavior and condoned our attitudes. The problem occurred in 1 Kings chapter 16. The nation had grown so cold towards the things of God. Their hearts had turned so far in the wrong direction until they were following a wicked king. His name was Ahab. You may not be that familiar with Ahab. You may know a little more about his wife, whose name was Jezebel. You don't even have to know all that the Bible says about her. History dictates that I've heard of a lot of little boys named Elijah, but I never met a little girl named Jezebel. And if I find out you name your child Jezebel, me, you, and God are going to have a long conversation. He was a wicked man with a wicked wife leading wicked people. How did God respond to their wickedness? You find it beginning in verse 1 of chapter 17. And then this happened. Elisha the Tishbite from among the settlers of Gilead confronted Ahab. As surely as God lives, the God of Israel, before whom I stand in obedient service, the next years are going to see a total drought, not a drop of dew or rain unless I say otherwise. Elisha, who was not introduced to us prior to chapter 17, is sent to Ahab and to Israel to tell them that because of your sinfulness, your wickedness, and your rebellion, it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain. When you read Luke's Gospel chapter 4 in verse 25, you discover that for the next 3.5 years, not one drop of rain fell. The judgment of God had fallen on them. Watch what you find beginning in verse 2. God then told Elijah, get out of here and fast. Head east and hide out at the Kerith ravine on the other side of the Jordan River. You can drink fresh water from the brook. I've commanded ravens to feed you. Elijah obeyed God's orders. He went and camped in the Kerith Canyon on the other side of the Jordan. And sure enough, ravens brought him his meals, both breakfast and supper, and he drank from the brook. God says, Elijah, go tell Ahab it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain. What is it in your life that God is on the verge of shutting down? I think sometimes we live in lives of such comfort until we think that just because something happened yesterday, it's going to happen today or it's going to happen tomorrow. When the truth is, at any given time, the judgment of God can fall on us, and what used to flow freely, God can turn off. That's why I live each day of my life to the best of my ability, thanking God for everything that I have. Now, I'll be honest, and I know I'm not the Lone Ranger. I complain sometimes. There's some things in my life that are not as perfect as I would like them to be, and sometimes I complain. Brother, let me tell you what always happens in response to my complaints. The moment I begin to complain, the first thing I think about is people who are far worse off than I am. The second thing that I think about whenever I begin to complain if I'm going to complain about the things that are going wrong, I got to be thankful for the things that are going right. You know, the third thing that happens anytime I feel like complaining, God reminds me that every now and then it's all right to complain. See, the problem with a whole lot of us, we have gotten so deep until we feel as though we cannot be honest about our emotions, honest about our fears. We will see by the time we get to the end of this text that there are some things that God cannot fix if you are not willing to face. God said to them, it's not going to rain. The same famine that they found themselves in, Elijah also found himself in. When there is no rain, famine follows, and death follows famine. Famine follows drought, and death follows famine. That means the longer this drought went on, the more people died. So God said to his prophet Elijah, after he sends him to the wicked king with the wicked wife leading wicked people, God says, Elijah, the same famine that they are in will grip you also. So follow my instructions. Go down to a brook called Kerith, 25 miles away. And I'm going to allow you to drink water from the brook. And I have commanded ravens to bring you bread and meat in the morning and in the evening. I wish you knew more about ravens. A raven is what we call a corvine bird from the crow family. It is not simply a carnivorous bird or an herbivore. That means it's not just a meat-eating bird or an herb-eating bird. It is an omnivorous bird. A raven will eat anything. For God to say, I'm going to send ravens to feed you in the morning and feed you in the evening is like telling Wells Fargo Bank, I'm going to send bank robbers to deliver your next deposit. Ravens ate anything and ate everything. Yet God said, I'm going to allow you to drink water from the brook, and the ravens will feed you breakfast and feed you dinner. You didn't hear what I said. God says, I'm going to allow you to drink water from a brook, and ravens will feed you breakfast and dinner. I wonder, what raven is it in your life that you've been trying to swat away? And it's that very thing that God has sent to sustain you. What brook is it in your life that you have been moving past, and it is that very brook that the Lord desires for you to drink from? What are you getting at, Pastor Thorpe? The Lord moves in mysterious ways. And the moment you think you've got God figured out is the moment you don't have God figured out, because he moves in mysterious ways. That's what you find in verse 1 through verse 6. The Lord moves in mysterious ways. But that's not all. Not only does the Lord move in mysterious ways, but the Lord does mysterious things. It's found beginning in verse 7 down through verse 12. Up until now, the main character of this historical record is the prophet Elijah. Now God is about to introduce a nameless widow woman who will teach us more in the next 18 verses than most of us will learn in our entire lifetimes. She teaches us that not only does the Lord move in mysterious ways, but the Lord does some mysterious things. That means his ways are mysterious, but then his deeds are mysterious. God is the only entity that I know of who will not act the way we want him to act. Hey, the Lord doesn't even do math the way we want him to do math. We say that 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. God says that 1 plus 1 plus 1 still equals 1. One Father, one Son, one Holy Ghost, yet it still makes up one God. We say that 2 and 5 multiplied equals 10. God says 2 and 5 multiplied can equal 5,000. Because one day he took 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And by the time he got done multiplying, he had fed 5,000 men, not counting the women and the children. His ways are mysterious, but then his deeds are mysterious. Watch what he says in verse 7 down through verse 12. Eventually, the brook dried up because of the drought. Then God spoke to him, "Get up and go to Zarephath in Sidon and live there. I've instructed a woman who lives there, a widow, to feed you." So he got up and went to Zarephath. As he came to the entrance of the village, he met a woman, a widow, gathering firewood. He asked her, "Please, would you bring me a little water in a jug? I need a drink." As she went to get it, he called out, "And while you're at it, would you bring me something to eat?" God says, God allowed Elijah's brook to dry up. And then he says to them, "Go to Zarephath. I have commanded a widow woman to sustain you." I wonder how many of us are still sitting beside a brook and the brook is dried up. We're still waiting on ravens to come and bring us breakfast and dinner when God is saying that season in your life has passed over. Now the season is go to Zarephath. I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain you. I had a whole lot of problems with that. Right from the surface, my first problem was, Lord, in a time of drought and famine, why would you send a man to a woman to be sustained? Lord, when you created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, you didn't put Eve there first, you put Adam there first. And before you gave him a wife, you gave him a job. Yet here, God says to Elijah, "I'm going to send you to Zarephath, and I have commanded not only a woman, but a widowed woman who's going through the same drought, the same famine that you are facing, but I've commanded her to take care of you." Then I called God. I said, Reverend Jesus, the further you read in the text, you discover not only is she a woman, not only has she lost her husband, but she's been left to raise a young son. She is caught in the midst of a drought, a famine, and surrounded by death. And God says, go to her in order to be sustained. And then I say, Reverend Jesus, where is this woman? And he said in Zarephath, Reverend Jesus, how far away is that? About 100 miles. I said, Lord, you're sending your servant who is hated by everyone he comes in contact with because they concluded that the servant or the mouthpiece of God was Elijah. And they concluded if there was no Elijah, there would be no word from God. And if there was no word from God, there would be no drought, there would be no famine, there would be no death. God sent Elijah through enemy territory for 100 miles to meet a widow woman with a young son. His ways are mysterious, but then his deeds are mysterious. And somebody in this room is wondering why the Lord has allowed certain things to happen to you. And God sent me by here to tell you, don't give up on God. Help is on the way. Don't get mad at him. Don't doubt him. Don't curse at him. Recognize that help is on the way. Now, let me give you this for free and parenthetically. All of the assistance that you find in 1 Kings 17 hinged upon one thing: obedience. Amen. God told Elijah to get up and go to Ahab. He got up and went to Ahab. He told Ahab what God told him to tell him. And then God says, leave Samaria where Ahab is and go to the brook at Kerith. That was 25 miles. Then he says, leave the brook and go 100 miles to Zarephath. In every instance, God told Elijah to get up and go, and Elijah got up and went. I wonder what verse we on. Hey, has the Lord clearly told you to do something recently and you did the opposite of what he told you to do? He told you to get up and go. You sat down and stayed. Every aspect of this chapter and the success that God provided hinges on obedience. Which means even when he behaves mysteriously, even when he does mysterious things, learn how to walk in perfect obedience. The Lord moves in mysterious ways. The Lord does some mysterious things. But there's a third element contained in this text. It is in verse 13 down through verse 16. And it is this: the Lord can do anything but fail. Everybody in this room, somewhere in your life, you need an Elijah. And Elijahs can change from one day to the next. But you need someone in your life who has been through some things with God. And they've learned how to hear God's voice in some areas. We'll see later on, none of us get it right 100% of the time. But you need to have somebody in your life who can get a prayer through in the time of trouble. Watch verse 13 down through verse 16. Now the woman says, Elijah shows up. He's traveled 100 miles. He's thirsty and he's hungry. And Elijah says to the woman, bring me some water And while she's going to get the water, Elisha says, by the way, at the end of verse 11, bring me something to eat too. King James Version says, bring me a morsel of bread. Message Bible refers to as a biscuit. Said, I need a drink. And she went to get it. He called out, and while you're at it, would you bring me something to eat? Watch the woman's response in verse 12. She said, I swear, as surely as your God lives, I don't have so much as a biscuit. I have a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a bottle. You found me scratching together just enough firewood to make a last meal for my son and me. After we eat it, we will die. Now, I had a problem with this. I called God. I said, Reverend Jesus, you said earlier when you told Elijah to leave the brook and go to Zarephath, you said that you had commanded a widow woman to sustain him. Now that he has arrived, why does the widow woman appear to not be aware of what the deal is? Has God ever sent you somewhere you knew he sent you there, but when you got there, the people there act like they didn't know why you were there? And here's what God proves. Even in jacked up circumstances, he can do anything but fail. Hey, watch again. Everything about the success of this chapter hinges on obedience. Elijah said to her, don't worry about a thing. Now, if that had been me, I would have said to God, did I come to the right place? Is this the right woman? Elisha was so sensitive to the fact that he had gone where God told him to go, and he was doing what God told him to do. He believed the woman. The woman says, even in a drought, I still have some water left, but I don't have anything else. How is it that the woman could be in a famine and still have water? Well, take a field trip. She had enough water to drink, just not enough water to plant with. Y'all deep. Y'all deep. Sometimes you got enough gas to get to the gas station. You just ain't got enough to get around the corner. Y'all ain't ready. Oh, I'm the Lone Ranger. I'm the only one ever rolled into a gas station on a wing and a prayer. You start looking at the gauge differently, hoping that if you change the angle you're looking at it from, that maybe it'll say or mean something different. The woman had to choose. She had planted all that she could plant, and her water supply was running so low until she knew she did not have enough water to irrigate another crop. This drought, by the time you read Luke chapter 4 and verse 25, lasted for 3.5 years. We don't know what year we're on in chapter 17, but somewhere in between the beginning and the end. This could be after the first year. It could be after the second year. Bottom line is she had enough water to drink, but not enough water to plant a harvest. And she says to Elijah, I'll bring you some water, but just as sure as your God lives, I have nothing for you to eat. She says, matter of fact, the reason I'm out here at the gate of the city, King James Version says, she was gathering 2 sticks to make a small fire because she had a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour. She was going to make one final biscuit, and she and her son were going to eat it and die. And watch the nerve of Elijah. Elijah had some nerve, because she told him in verse 12, all I have is enough for one biscuit. Me and my boy gonna eat it and die. Here's verse 13. Elijah said to her, don't worry about a thing. Go ahead and do what you've said. But first, make a small biscuit for me and bring it back here. Then go ahead and make a meal from what's left for you and your son. This is the word of God of Israel. The jar of flour will not run out, and the bottle of oil will not become empty before God sends rain on the land and ends this drought. Elisha said, I heard what you said, but I also heard what God said. And God has been blessing my obedience thus far, and I'm not going to doubt him now. You know what Elijah's saying? God told me to get up and go to Ahab. I went, and he blessed. Then he told me to get up and go to the brook. I went, and he blessed. I drank water from the brook, and he sent scavenger birds to feed me in the morning and feed me in the evening. Elijah was saying, you can't make me doubt him because I know too much about him. Elisha says, I know he has mysterious ways. I know he has mysterious deeds, but I also know he can do anything but fail. So watch the woman's response. And she went right off and did it. Did just as Elijah asked. And it turned out as he said. Daily food for her and her family. The jar of meal didn't run out, and the bottle of oil didn't become empty. God's promise fulfilled to the letter exactly as Elijah had delivered it. The Lord can do anything but fail. Hey, now watch Elijah's promise. Elisha said, the oil that you have will last. The flour that you have will last until this famine is over. Elijah's rationale is that the way God works is that he works through, catch this, different sources in different seasons. Here's God's word. He works through different sources in different seasons. And the problem with a whole lot of us, our season has changed, but we're still looking to the same source. There was a season for Elijah to drink from the brook and allow ravens to bring him meals in the morning and evening. That was his source, but then God changed his season. God says, leave Kerith and go to Zarephath. I'm changing your season and I'm changing your source. And could it be the reason you're so frustrated is because either you are stuck in one season and God has moved on, or you are relying on one source and God is supplying through another source. So Elisha says, your meal won't run out until the famine is over. Which means when the famine is over, that's a season change. You can expect a source change. You don't eat now as an adult the way you did as an infant. I pray you don't. If you 12 and you still trying to find your mama talking about it's lunchtime, you need to recognize you're in a season change. And that brings about a source change. The Lord moves in mysterious ways. The Lord does some mysterious things. The Lord can do anything but fail. Here's the last thing, and I'm in my seat. The Lord will do everything except fail. I wish this text ended in verse 16, but it actually keeps going in verse 17. In verse 17, but this gonna bother y'all. This gonna be a problem here. This was a problem for me. Verse 17, this is after God has blessed Elijah, after God has blessed the widow woman. Then verse 17, later on, the woman's son became sick. The sickness took a turn for the worse. And then he stopped breathing. The woman said to Elijah, why did you ever show up here in the first place? A holy man barging in, exposing my sins, and killing my son. Here's what the woman thought. The woman said, you know what, Elijah? If you'd just left me alone, me and my son would have been dead by now. Because remember, the famine was so grievous, she was gathering some sticks to make a final meal, and she and her son were going to die. She had already lost her husband. Elisha shows up, and all of a sudden, she's eating daily, even in the midst of a famine. Life was going on as normal. And all of a sudden, her son gets sick, and then her son dies. And she says, Elijah, you are the problem. If you had not come, God would not have come with you. And if God had not come with you, my sins would not be exposed. The woman felt that because of Elijah's presence, that the judgment of God showed up at her address. Hey, watch Elijah's response, and this really gonna mess you up. Elisha said, hand me your son. He then took him from her bosom, carried him up to the loft where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he prayed, oh God, my God, why have you brought this terrible thing on this widow who has opened up her home to me? Why have you killed her son? Can I rush ahead and tell you all the stuff I want to tell you? Here's the first thing I want to tell you. Just because you lost it doesn't mean God took it. Not everything you lost means that God took it. And because that's true, you know what you need to learn how to do? Pray. Pray. Don't ever get so deep until you start believing that you and God are on the same page about everything, you still got to pray. Oh, Pastor, you don't understand. I've been saved since I was 5. I don't care if you were saved in the womb. You still got to pray. Pastor, I come to church every time the doors open. I pay my tithe. I try to love all of my enemies. You can have all of that going for you. But you still got to pray. Just because you lost it doesn't mean that God took it. All right, let me give you a second thing on my way to my seat. Number one, just because you lost it doesn't mean that God took it. Here's the second one. God does not tell you everything. Because Elisha said, Lord, why did you do this? Why have you allowed this calamity to come on this woman? Why have you killed her son? And the Lord says, Elisha, you do know you work for me, but I'm still the boss. And I don't have to tell you everything. Hey, and because the Lord is not going to tell you everything, you know what that means you need to do? Pray. Pray. Because the Lord says we don't ever need to get so comfortable with each other until you forget who I am. Pray. Preacher. Pray. Child of God. Pray. All right. Just because you lost something doesn't mean God took it. That means you ought to pray. God does not tell you everything. That's why you ought to pray. Here's the last thing and I'm out. God will always be God and you are not. You know what that means you need to do? Always pray. Because God is going to always be God. You ain't never going to be God. So you know what you need to do with your spiritual self? Pray. Hey, woman says, Elisha's response, by the time you get to the end of verse 20, why have you killed her son? Watch what he does in verse 21. 3 times he stretched himself out full length on the boy, praying with all his might. God, my God, put breath back into this boy's body. God listened to Elijah's prayer and put breath back into his body. He was alive. Elijah picked the boy up, carried him downstairs from the loft, and gave him to his mother. Here's your son, said Elijah, alive. The woman said to Elijah, I see it all now. Some stuff you see, but the Lord wants you to see it all. She said, I see it all now. You are a holy man. When you speak, God speaks a true word. God will always be God. You are not. And that means you need to always pray. Hey, in Luke chapter 4, in verse 25, we are told that this famine lasted for 3.5 years. And you know what Jesus says in Luke 4:25 and 26? Jesus says that a prophet is not honored in his own country. Jesus said there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's day, but God went past all of them and found a non-Israelite widow and turned her life upside down. You know what I'm getting at, Brother Harry? According to Luke 4:25 and 26, we think she was getting a hard time in 1 Kings 17, but God says she was picked out to be picked on. Which means all the stuff you're going through can be God supernaturally at work, not to pull you down, but to lift you up. Hey, we're reading about Elijah in 1 Kings 17. If you read 2 Kings chapter 4, you read about his successor, Elisha. 1 Kings, Elijah. 2 Kings, his replacement, Elisha. Elisha was visiting a place called Shunem, and while he was there, a woman and her husband said, the woman said to her husband, "This preacher keep coming by. And when he comes by, he doesn't have any place to stay. Why don't we build him a little room and add it on to our house?" Her husband agreed. They built a room, added it to the side of the house. Elisha and his servant Gehazi are living there with this kind Shunammite family. Elisha says to Gehazi, his servant, he said, "These people so nice to us. What can we do to be nice to them?" Gehazi said, "They don't have no son." Elisha said, "That's what we'll do." He said to the woman, "This time next year, you will have a son." The woman said, "I didn't bring you here for that." She said, "Don't play with me. Don't toy with me. Don't toy with my expectations." Elisha said, "Just as sure as God lives, this time next year, you will have a son." You know what happened by that time next year? Ooh. She had a baby. Child starts to grow. Child was out in the field working with his dad, and the child said, "My head, my head." The daddy said to the servants, "Take him to his mama," because that's what most daddies do when children ain't feeling good. Take him to his mother. The mother took the child, held the child until evening, and the child died laying on her lap. She takes the child up to Elisha's room, lays the child on Elisha's bed. Then she tells one of her servants, "Get a donkey ready. I'm going to find this preacher." Servant takes her to where Elijah is. Elisha sees her coming, says to Gehazi, "Go see what the Shunammite wants." Gehazi goes, asks the woman, "Is everything fine with your husband?" She said, "Yeah, everything fine." He says, "Everything fine with your son?" She said, "Yeah, everything fine." But she kept going until he got to Elisha. When she gets to him, she falls down at his feet. She reminds him that, "I didn't ask you for a son. You told me that I was going to have a son." Elisha says to Gehazi, "Take my staff. Go to where the boy is. Lay the staff on the boy." The woman says to Elisha, she said, "I don't care nothing about your staff. That ain't what the Lord sent me here for." She says, "I will not leave you until you come back with me to my house." The servant runs ahead, lays the staff, nothing happens. Elisha gets in the house. The boy is dead and cold. Elisha stretches himself out over the boy's body. and his body gets warm. Elisha goes back down into the house and paces back and forth, goes back up again, stretches himself back on the boy, and the boy sneezed 7 times. And Elisha delivered him back to his mother. Pastor, why are you telling us all of this? If Elijah didn't know what to do in 1 Kings 17, Elisha wouldn't have known what to do in 2 Kings chapter 4. And God's word to somebody in here is, you don't know what God is up to. You know why? Because he moves in mysterious ways. He does some mysterious things. He can do anything but fail. But he will do everything except fail. And all you got to do is be obedient to whatever he has said.